Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's COVID-19 Destination Recovery Insights Exchange. Just wanted to give you a quick note about the meeting. As you can see on the screen, please remain muted during the presentations. If there's any background noise, it can be distracting to our presenters. You can keep your camera on or you can keep it off. That is entirely up to you, but I said just please remain muted during the presentations. When we come to the Q&A, you can either raise your hand and then I'll call on you and then you can ask your question, or if you're feeling a bit shy, you can always drop it in the Q&A as shown on your screen. There's a chat function, so feel free to say hello, where you're from. I know there's a lot of people here that know each other, so I'm sure you might have other things you want to talk about or comment about the presentations you see today. So I'll just quickly run through the agenda real quickly. So of course, we'll have welcome remarks by our PATA CEO, Ms. Liz Ortiguera. That'll be followed by remarks from Jessie McComb. She's a global tourism specialist at the World Bank. Then we'll hear from the Singapore Tourism Board regarding seamless travel into Singapore. And then we'll hear from a presentation by Dahlberg Advisors. And then we'll talk about the importance of biodiversity as we look towards recovery of the travel and tourism industry. Then we will have Q&A and roundtable discussions. So you can hold off on your questions during the presentations, and then when we get to the Q&A, you can feel free to ask it then. As I said, feel free to raise your hand or drop it in the Q&A, and we can ask the questions there. And that is all of my notes for this morning. And so without further ado, I will pass this to Ms. Liz Ortiguera for her welcome remarks. Liz, over to you.
Welcome, everyone, and greetings from Bangkok, where I just arrived. And looking at the calendar, it's hard to believe that we started these Destination Recovery Insight sessions 1 year ago in collaboration with our good colleagues at World Bank. And who would have predicted that we'd still be working through this, 12 months ago, that, it would be this challenging and long running. And we know that, in the coming 6 to 12 months, our region will still be in recovery. My big thanks to our speakers today from two of our newest members from Singapore Tourism Board, who we're welcoming back after maybe an absence of about 12 years. So I'm so happy to have you back in the community. And Dahlberg, our good colleagues there that are doing wonderful work in the ESG space. And, I'd say, for those of you who haven't joined our sessions before, these sessions were really started with the intent of collaborating and sharing insights across the region. While I know that destinations at times or often may be in a competitive mode through this unprecedented crisis, we know that we need to collaborate together. Because really it's no single destination can recover alone in our region. And my big thanks, I know that 12 months ago, we kicked off with Hawaii, and Jennifer is on here today with us. And that's what it really takes. It really involves best practice sharing so that destinations can learn more quickly together so that we can recover as a unified region. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Paul, who I know is going to play a video from our colleague, Jessie from World Bank, since she's on a plane right now.
Well, thank you very much, Liz. And yes, you're correct. Jessie is currently on her way to Cambodia, one of the destinations in this region that is open. It's been open for a while. So let me just pull up the video and we'll hear from her.
Thank you, Liz, for your opening remarks, and Paul for the excellent hosting and facilitation, as always. While it's unfortunate that I'm not able to attend this session in person, I'm pleased to be able to provide a few opening remarks for this 6th in the series of Destination Recovery Government Insight Exchanges. Importantly, the reason that I'm not able to join this session is that I'm currently on my way to Cambodia. Cambodia is a destination that reopened to international visitors in December 2021 and removed all remaining travel restrictions in March this year. Additionally, they reinitiated their visa on arrivals process to help facilitate easier access for their primary source markets. These early moves speak to emerging trends in the region to create easier access to destinations and to smooth out the travel process. Even in preparing for this trip, there was less stress as I didn't need to worry about pre-flight COVID testing, arranging a visa, or getting stuck in country. In today's session, you will all hear about Singapore's experience in reopening and creating a safe and seamless travel journey. Their reopening marks an important milestone for the Asia region, as Singapore is a key transportation hub for international connectivity and an important source market for many of the countries. Given the Singapore Tourism Board's leadership in destination management and marketing and digital transformation, I'm hoping they will be able to provide key insights to the reopening process and how they are leveraging new trends in technology and consumer behavior to successfully reopen. As the global tourism industry continues to emerge from this crisis, the World Bank is committed to supporting a more sustainable tourism sector in the future. Recently, the World Bank approved nearly $160 million worth of financing for sustainable and blue economy tourism projects across the Caribbean, Cabo Verde, and the Gambia. All three of these projects demonstrate a new wave of blue tourism investments that promote local agriculture, fisheries, and supply chain linkages, support diversification into new market segments focused on nature and adventure tourism, and build resilience through climate-smart infrastructure. These projects take a targeted focus on balancing economic growth through tourism with conservation and biodiversity protection. In this vein, I look forward to you all hearing from Dahlberg Advisors on how governments and industry are taking a dedicated approach to growing their tourism industries while protecting their biodiversity. Thank you all again for joining PATA and the World Bank for this great series of government exchanges. Please join the conversation at the end of the presentation. Write down your comments, put them in the chat box, or raise your hand. This is your opportunity to learn from each other, identify partners, and create a network that will help the Asia Pacific rebound together. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jessie, for those great words. We do wish she could be able to join us today, but as you said, she's currently on her way to Cambodia. So if you happen to be in Cambodia, feel free to reach out to her and say hello. I do want to make one point before we get to our first presentation. You know, Liz just reminded me, and if you haven't seen, we've just released our Asia Pacific Snapshot dashboard. So it gets released every week or every Wednesday. So in it, we have sort of a snapshot of the destinations within the region that are open, their opening status, and their recovery rates. It also has more further detailed information on our website. If you don't have a copy of it, feel free to send me an email. I can put you on the mailing list. If you do get it and don't see your destination on it, feel free to reach out to us. We actually are trying to figure out how best to be able to show all the destinations from all of our members and across the region. But it's been very well received. It gives a little sort of quick, easy read on what's going on within the region, whether your destination's open, partially open, or also leading to your actual government website for travel requirements for anybody that was wishing to travel to your destination. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions about our dashboard. And if you have any questions about it, feel free to contact myself as well. So without further ado, we've come to our first presentation. And with us from the Singapore Tourism Board is Ms. Zhu Lu. Hopefully I pronounced it correctly. Apologies. She is the Chief Experience Officer, Technology Transformation Group. She is an award-winning user experience expert with deep expertise in omni-channel and emerging experiences. She's here to take us behind the scenes of streamlining vaccinated travel requirements. So without further ado, Ms. Zhu, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. And hello, everyone. Thanks for having me today. Okay, let me share my screen. Just give me a second. All right, just let me know if you guys can see my screen.
Yes.
All right, great. Hello, everyone. So my name is Zhu from Singapore Tourism Board, User Experience Center of Excellence. Thank you so much for having me and my team here to share some of the stories around the vaccinated traveling workshop that we conducted sometime last year within the whole of the government to basically streamline the traveler experience for them to come into Singapore. So now with the travel restriction eased, and I'm sure many people are already, and on the way traveling around. For me as well, I'm like so excited to kind of, travel around, but if you can imagine, right, a few months back, it was still very, very difficult for international travelers coming to Singapore, even though we have different travel lanes established at the time, but even for vaccinated travelers coming in Singapore is still quite tough and hard. So for the past 2 years, my team has been actively conducting social listenings to really understand the travelers' pain points, right? To see what are the comments and sharings that they have on Facebook groups and different social media channels about their experience coming to Singapore, what the problems that they see, right? What exactly they're handling all the different requirements. So definitely it's not very easy for them to come over. And also, as us, right, not traveling are the one just putting up the policy and process together. We don't really understand the real pain points. So that's why it's super, super important to keep tab on what exactly people are saying and talking about. So on this slide, it just give you kind of snapshot of some of the, common pain points people are raising. So
Ms. Chu, can you just pause a second? I'm just, I think I need to just fix something here because I think Liz is telling me that. Can you just stop sharing for 1 second? I just want to
of course.
unspotlight you for a second. I think that may be the problem.
Okay, I'll stop sharing.
Sorry. Okay, try sharing now. Let's see how this looks.
All right, sure. Does it work?
Is her slides bigger now? Is it more clear to see? Okay, I think so. All right, I think you can go ahead.
Okay, cool. All right. Okay. So yeah, so just now I was touching on the pain points, right, for traveler coming to Singapore. So some of the common ones you might aware or not be aware is that in the old times, right, coming to Singapore, everyone still have to apply a vaccinated travel pass in order to enter Singapore. And as a part of the application process, you have to upload your vaccination travel cert using your digital code. So there was a lot of problems, right, that people having hard time uploading it or, encounter errors all the time. So from us behind the scene, once we talk to, the folks at the back, we know that it probably is because of the mismatching of the names or some of the QR code or digital cert are not streamlined. There's no golden standard, right, across the world at that time. So that's why there are a lot of problems happened. But from the traveler point of view, they are really frustrated, right? They are planning to come, but they couldn't get the application processed. And we all knew that the requirements are, gradually relaxed from time to time, and there are changes from time to time. So it's quite hard for people to keep updated with all the different kind of requirements. And sometimes if we ease some of the policy from upstream, but in order for the downstream and operations, airlines and different officers to understand the latest requirements, it may not be so streamlined and efficient, right? We see cases that people still got turned away at the airport counter to say, hey, you have to get a PCR test, right? Even though we said an ART pre-arrival is good enough. So things like that. I think testing, as a lot of people are aware, right, it's a big requirement, for many countries in the early days, either PC, like a pre-departure test or on-arrival test. And in Singapore at that time, last year, when we first launched vaccinated traveling, we do still require on-arrival tests for the travelers. So how long, the test result going to be coming out for the vaccinated travelers is very important. And in the event, if it's not coming out within the timelines, how they're going to proceed with that. And there's also changes that we want to accommodate more flexibility, right, for the travelers. So you can actually book an ART test in any of the clinics, across Singapore to get it done, and then you can be free and easy to move. Even though from our point of view, it's a great move. However, thinking about the traveler point of view, right, not everybody is familiar with Singapore. So for them to even, book appointment in advance in the clinics, travel over there, and wait for the results is also another thing coming through. So there's a ton of different, frustrations and pain points rising from all the different aspects. And then this slide is just giving you a bit of the glimpse of the overall user journey, right, that you can see that we put together from end to end for a short-term international traveler coming to Singapore. Overall, there are 16 steps. And the part that I highlight in yellow here, all the newly introduced requirements using COVID times. And all the different, I would say, government agencies, right, within Singapore might be looking at different aspects of looking, throughout this user journey. That also result in certain, parts of the duplication, because, no one is looking at holistically. They're more concerning about what are the requirements and compliance they have to kind of put in place. So as us, right, STB, Singapore Tourism Board, us being advocate for the short-term travelers, to be honest, we couldn't hold our peace anymore, right? It's just too painful for the traveler coming to Singapore. So we took the lead to highlight some of the key pain points to a very high level government platforms, right, within Singapore to voice out our concern. And to rally the different agencies working on the process with us together to streamline the process. And luckily, eventually, there are 31 participants from different parts of Singapore government come together to conduct this workshop together with the aim to streamline everything together. What we've done is we applied a double diamond framework, which is 4 stages, as you can see, from discover, define, design, and development. And for the workshop itself, and all the prep we're going to the workshop, it's really about focusing on the discover and define phase to again unpack the pain points, to understand all the policies and operations put together and how we can really redefining the problem and streamline the experience. Versus once all the different outcomes and ideas and solutions coming out of the workshop will be for each individual agencies to design and implement, which will be the next 2 stages. So why is the discovery phase so important, right? If you could imagine it just putting all the different agencies coming together and workshop, have a chat, open to talk to each other, that's it, right? But actually us being, our role is not just a facilitator to get people to talk. And to be honest, we also have a clear agenda to really cut down the type of the process that we see here to address users' pain points, and then why there are so many different steps. Is there any areas that the policy could be relaxed? Is there areas that we can streamline the different agency to work together instead of duplicating the process? Is there any way we can really help the user a lot more better? And what are the challenges, right, different agencies are facing? So that's why it's important for everybody to come together. And as leading to the workshop, and then for us to really to steer the conversation in the workshop, it's important for us to know all the different aspects, right? So that's where the prep work comes in, and that's part of the discovery phase, which we focused on 3 main areas. One is the traveler pain points and feedback. As I mentioned before, we've done the social listening, but at the same time, we also reach out to a lot of regional offices in many different countries, mainly in the US, North Asia, as well as America, right? That's at that time border quite relaxed. So starting to relax, and to interview them directly, right? To understand what exactly are the points and how they go through the journey. Is there any missing point or new rise to pain points they are raising? And the other part is also looking at many other countries are doing, right? I mean, everybody is slowly kind of gradually move towards pre-COVID, start to relax the travel restrictions. So how are they doing? It really helped us to benchmark and to make sure we remain competitive. And the last part definitely is on looking inside, looking at our policies, right? In terms of to ensure the safety, health and safety, what are the requirements that we put in place, whether it makes sense or not, whether there are areas to improve. So with all the insights that we gathered, we move on to the second stage, which is the define phase. And that's where the workshop has been conducted. The workshop aim is to get all the insights together in a very structured manner for the different part of the agency to follow through the process and to really think out of the box and redefine the problem and the objectives that we want to achieve and to come together to co-create together. So this is just a snapshot of my team and myself, putting together for the workshop. As you can see, it's very important to focus on the traveler point of view. That's why we anchor the whole workshop through the user journey. So remember the long 16 steps of the user journey I shared before. We use that as the anchor to put up, all the steps, right, in the big room that we have. And additionally, we had 3 streamlines underneath the journey. One is again around the pain points at every single step. The other part is about the policy and the process that we put together for each of the steps. And the last, the third one is about source status and solution and ideas, right? Because naturally, when you look at the pain points at every step, you will have ideas already to, encourage people, encourage different participants from different, agencies to come together to think about solutioning. We also have source status to get them, started to kick off the session. So on the day itself, when we kick off the workshop, it's really around sharing the competitive landscape as well as the visitor pain points. It did a really good job to eventually put everybody in the right mindset to understand and to see beyond what they see day to day, what other people are doing, and put themselves in the perspective of the travelers, right? Really need to help them from that stage. After that, after our sharing of the competitive analysis as well as the visitor pain point, we group them into 3 different groups to look at different stages of travel, from pre-arrival, upon arrival, and post-arrival. So each of the participants as key decision makers from key agencies, they are the subject matter expert, right? To really tell us what are the requirement and policy at every stage. And when people are kind of talking to each other, starting to unpack, and then they just naturally realize there are areas that they can further collaborate and streamline. So after each of these 3 group activity, we put everybody together to share back to the whole group in terms of what are some of the requirements putting in place and what is the. And we keep asking ourselves, like, why, right? Because at the end of the day, you just have to answer why certain things are putting in place, whether it's still relevant or necessary to avoid the silos and make sure everybody's also keep updated with the most important information. So out of the sharing, right, with everybody, people naturally have ideas coming out to address all the different pain points and start to also talk to each other to say collaborate. Can we exchange information so we can not asking traveler 3 times of the personal information along the way at every single stage. Maybe one time once we pass on the information, so it'll be so much easier. So ideas like that just coming out naturally. And so the second part of the workshop itself is really about putting your ideas out and prioritize your idea for each of your individual groups and coming together to prioritize. Because at the end of the day, we are under pressure, right, to really deliver a streamlined experience for the travelers. So what are the very high impact user experience? And let's be practical, right? What are the effort required to address some of those, to put those solutions together to address the pain points? Is the effort really high, or is it medium or low? That just put us into a very action mode to make sure we clearly know what are the critical things that we need to address. So now moving back to the user journey I showed before, again, in the old days, it was 16 steps when we conduct the workshop to start with. After the workshop we streamline and cut down the process from 16 to 13. Okay, if you listen to the number, it doesn't seem like a lot of steps has been cut it. But you will notice even some of the steps are still kept in place. It has been kind of relaxed compared to what was put in before. So for example, application process that you need to apply a travel application coming to Singapore is no longer needed, right? We remove that because with flight capacity, we can pretty much have a good control of the numbers of people coming in versus pre-departure test at that time when we conduct the workshop is still required as a PCR test for the travelers even 3 years above. Then when we talk to the MOH, right, Minister of Health, really understand the requirements, and then they are okay and open to relax it to ART test for travelers, and kids below 12 years old without vaccination are okay to travel with the family. So small little things like this has been also removed and streamlined. I think one most important thing is also the number of the tests, right? Tests in the end, which MOH openly and transparently share with us at one test will be enough. So then we were discussing between pre-departure test versus on-arrival test. And pre-departure test is going to be so much easier for the travelers from their point of view because they're still in their home countries. It's easier to find a provider, get the right testing in place compared coming to Singapore. I still have to kind of conduct the test. So we land on the conclusion of doing just one test. So there are, various things has been kind of, improved. And of course, STB, right, as a part of the work, we also work on one piece is about addressing the traveling in terms of what if you get COVID here in Singapore, right? At that time, local residents here in Singapore, if you got COVID, there's very clear protocols for you to follow, 1, 2, 3, what to go, what to do. Versus there's nothing for the short-term travel. It's a totally gap out there, which also concern a lot of travelers, right? So what we've done is work with MOH to clearly put out the protocol for the travelers so they will be easy to understand what are steps. From the workshop itself, right, which is a couple of months ago, I think last year, October, to now, we are pretty much back in, normal opening of the borders, travel as pre-COVID times. But I guess the work that we've done during the workshop really paved out the way for the different agencies to come together with the big picture in mind in terms of what you are trying to deliver and with a user-centric mindset to be, putting into all your work policy establishment as well as your operational development. And for us as part of STB Center of Excellence, our mandate is the same, right? To really work and lead the private service with private tourism industry as well public sectors to come together to co-create and develop experience so that Singapore can remain competitive. And they're part of the work that we do. There's 3 areas that we're looking at. One thing is very much like the vaccinated travel workshop that I shared. We collaborate and drive a lot of interagency work within the government to make sure there's no policies, to start to remove, right, policy silo to be more efficient and streamlined. At the same time, we also lead with key tourism industry to drive a lot of those strategic and cross cutting edge tourism offerings and experiences. At the same time, I think capability building is very important. At the end of the day, individuals should be equipped with design thinking, process, and tools so they can drive their project more successfully and efficiently. All right, that's all for my sharing. I'm happy to take some, questions later on.
Well,
Over to you, Paul.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation. As she just said, if you have any questions, we'll be taking them after our next presentation. Or as I said earlier before, you can also drop them in the Q&A if you feel shy about raising your hands. So thank you so much for your presentation. Really, I think it's a great concept, and I think you can do that just for not just regarding the current situation, but any type of improvements in making the travel experience more seamless. So thank you so much for that. Now, our next presenter, he is a principal at Dahlberg Advisors. Dahlberg Advisors is an impact advisory group operating from more than 30 locations worldwide. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Principal Dahlberg Advisors, Mr. Mokena Makeka. We'll be talking about the importance of biodiversity as we look towards recovery. Mokena, over to you.
Greetings, colleagues. Allow me to share my screen and then we'll get into the discussion immediately. One moment. Scroll down. There we go. There we go. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, that's odd. Just one moment. Share. Perfect. There we go. Slideshow from beginning.
Just full screen.
Good.
Just full screen it, and then you're good to go. I still see that.
Yeah, are we at full screen now? It should be.
Yep, there you go. All right.
Perfect. Brilliant. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share some reflections about what we're beginning to see at a systemic level with regards to destination recovery and the intersection between that and tourism and biodiversity. This presentation will not be as granular in terms of the sort of end-to-end user experience as from my previous colleague, but will give an indication of some of the trends that we're beginning to pick up and we imagine will probably be quite relevant for the next 2 years to come. So let's frame the discussion partly around this question of what does global biodiversity look like and mean. So there's a theory of change document that was produced fairly recently by the Convention on Biological Diversity. And it sets up really a sort of positive tension, if you will, between the current status, which is increasing loss of biodiversity that jeopardizes human well-being, and this objective towards a vision where we live in harmony with nature. This captures a sort of framework of, let's call it, two sort of buckets of activities: understanding the importance of the sort of mission, if you will, reducing threat, meeting people's needs, what are the sort of enabling conditions, responsibility and transparency, but also what are the sort of milestones and goals, how are these human needs actually met, how are the benefits shared equitably, and what are the means of implementation, working towards now up towards 2050. That is a large horizon. And of course, I'm sure we're probably more concerned about the next 2 to 3 years as we actually do instant recovery. But given that biodiversity is a sort of longer arc, if you will, in terms of the implications, it's important to have both a long-term view in relation to the short term. Regenerative tourism and enhanced biodiversity require systemic coordination for destination recovery. And it's so important to emphasize this. All too often, some of the challenges, the strategies around the tourism sector might see themselves within a particular silo, but it's important to understand that it actually operates in a much larger continuum, which is a combination of tourists, local residents, local government, as well as tourist service providers. And these all come together around essentially 6 key buckets: policy, markets, human capital, finance, culture, and support professionals. And it's when we begin to understand this as a sort of ecosystem approach that we can begin to think about what are the key components that are required for truly sustainable destination recovery. But even within that, we also have to start to unpack what is the intersection with regards to tourism and biodiversity. We are familiar with the notion of mass tourism, large numbers of people seeking replication of their own culture in institutional settings. However, wildlife tourism or ecotourism, etc., is a very, very different approach. It has to engage with issues such as small-scale sustainable activities. It has to do with a different experiential aspect, if you will. And very often you cannot divorce biodiversity from this question of this sort of subset of engagement with nature, wildlife, and context. And that requires a nuanced framing of the relationship between ecotourism and biodiversity. Now, these nuances have significant implications once you overlay them with this question of biodiversity. If you look at the diagram on my right-hand side, the sort of typical, let's call it buckets for tourism, transport, accommodation, and activities goes to this very particular filter when we're thinking of biodiversity: land use and conversion and saving and conservation, physical contact with that landscape, the addition of matter that comes as those peoples engage with the environment, the withdrawal of that matter, etc. And how do we minimize the impact of disturbance, which leads us to this much deeper understanding of biodiversity as genetic biodiversity, species biodiversity, and ecosystems biodiversity. And very often in conversations around tourism, the genetic biodiversity is not seen as important or as understood as, let's say, species, which one can easily gravitate to, or even the complexity of ecosystems. Now, when we understand the sort of conceptual model for the ecological impacts of tourism on biodiversity in relation to this question to recovery, it allows us to think of the opportunity with a slightly different lens. One is to recognize that tourism, if it's framed as a very linear economic model and short-term thinking, can actually be a threat not only to the tourism industry itself, but also to biodiversity. Sustainable tourism comes across as a much bigger opportunity when it looks at non-linear economic models, not short-term thinking, but really about understanding a much broader continuum. With international tourism figures, this is a figure prior to COVID-19, obviously. What was still interesting to look at this particular diagram is the distribution of these activities, the distribution of these movements in relation to natural environments, and of course, the potential that large parts of the world can still unlock, because as we would hope, in terms of our recovery, we're looking at increased numbers of tourism arrivals throughout the world. But the question is, where are they going? And in terms of these destinations, to what extent are they ecologically sustainable? To what extent are they having a sort of long-term view? And to what extent are they fostering and increasing biodiversity and not being a threat towards it? And it's important to recognize that when these intersections are not thought about critically, that we have significant problems. So exposure to zoonotic pathogens can be associated with intrusions and loss of biodiversity, whether this in particular forests or other sorts of poorly regulated agricultural landscapes or mismanaged urban growth. This can alter the composition of wildlife communities and increase the potential not only of health scares, but even future pandemics. So increasingly, as populations grow, as cities expand, as the tourism industry bounces back, we have to be even more vigilant about understanding the balance between intrusions and the sort of biodiversity implications around not necessarily tourism on its own, but the larger question of anthropization or human movement in these sorts of environments. However, despite the pandemic, tourism growth is expected to rebound and recur. And this is a confluence of a number of things. One is the recognition that people do want to reconnect. The pandemic has crystallized for many people the importance of a connection to people, to landscape, to the proverbial bucket list. At the same time, our populations are continuing to grow, particularly in the global south between now and 2050. So you could almost imagine with a sort of, let's call it par on par increase of the middle class, that there will be ambitions with regards to traveling and so on. But it also means that we're entering into an age of increased awareness of not only climate change, the importance of local communities, and the importance of real deep economic impact, particularly as consumers become far much more wise about how their capital spend is being deployed, as say compared to the 1970s, the 1980s. And at the same time, it's important to recognize that there are amazing examples where there can be a confluence between tourism, ecological management, enhanced livelihoods, and biodiversity. In the 1990s, when the Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, and Uganda came together to sign an agreement on transboundary gorillas, it took quite some time for it to realize its full ambition. However, today, it's a shining example in many respects of doing a number of things. One is ensuring that tourist capital goes back to local communities, ensuring that this capital is also spent with regards to ecological conservation. So, and thanks to this particular agreement, mountain gorillas have actually increased in number. So you can have a sort of sweet spot, if you will, between tourism, ecological management, biodiversity, and enhanced livelihoods. And I think in many ways, this is part of what we have to think about quite critically. Even if we don't have large exotic species, the broader question of enhanced biodiversity through human action comes to play. So the age that we're in right now, the Anthropocene, requires greater vigilance and appreciation of biodiversity and the ecosystem services they provide. This notion of ecosystem services is somewhat new in some sectors. It's about the importance of, let's say, the water that comes out of the Congo Basin and its contribution to the Sahel region. It's also about the role of forest and oxygen that is released by these massive landscapes, if you will, in terms of contributing to global health. But once we understand that with our increased impact on the planet, there are some serious implications for how we think about accommodation, how we think about tourism provision, hospitality, transport infrastructure, and so on. Numerous studies have shown that with improper infrastructure development, there could even be quite negative impacts in terms of the landscape management. Having said that, it's important not to forget there have been some positive impacts of the pandemic, although they do not outweigh the negative impacts, including loss of life, to be clear. But evidence has shown that in some instances, there's been reduced air and water pollution, short-term disruption in wildlife trafficking, and in some instances, even ecosystem restoration. The negative impacts, however, are vast. In many cases, it has led to increased exploitation of wildlife resources, direct tourism revenue loss, staff absenteeism, poor performance, increased human dependence on natural resources, particularly in places where those tourism revenue losses have been quite severe, disruptions of field and research work, and poor species monitoring, which persists. But probably most importantly is that a lot of the revenues that go towards conservation in some respects are tied into patterns of flows of capital coming from the tourism sector. So there is an intimate relationship between making sure that we have increased sustainable tourism in order to ensure that its contribution to biodiversity can be more substantial. And unfortunately, given a number of recent challenges, such as the potential of an impending recession, as well as the conflict in Ukraine, it means that the planetary recovery, if you will, from an economic perspective, will be somewhat delayed. And we can expect that this might dampen the full potential of how the tourism industry will recover over the next 12 to 24 months. I'll close by offering a few key takeaways that hopefully will help us to anchor the discussion as well as lead to some thoughts. The one is that the destination recovery will require enhanced and ongoing management of access to biodiverse landscapes. This is the only way that we can counter zoonotic contamination. We need to have a much stronger partnership between the tourism industry and landscape management. The second one, which is not as well known, is the importance of health infrastructure. Increasingly, tourists are beginning to ask themselves, if they do fall sick in a particular location, what is the health infrastructure like? How quickly could they get to the hospital? What is the sort of regime with regards to personal well-being? I believe that in order to support destination recovery, cities, countries, locations will have to think quite critically about health infrastructure as much as they might think about entertainment infrastructure or mobility. It's an often unthought of part of the continuum, which goes back to my first diagram about the importance of understanding who are the key ecosystem players. Enhanced equity for local livelihoods aligned to sustainable tourism principles. This is not new, but I think it's important to continue to embed it. As I said, capital will be increasingly thoughtful about understanding how a local livelihood is being improved by their spend, and if we can look at different forms of enhancing equity and participation in terms of that spend. Digital infrastructure becomes important, not only with regards to surfing the internet during one's travels, but digital infrastructure has a huge role to play also with regards to conservation, also with regards to health access, also with regards to capital flows and the ability to make payments. So it's important that in terms of any sort of recovery, that there's also substantial investment in making sure that digital infrastructure is up to speed. Harmonization with nature is an imperative. And it's important to protect and develop in moderation. And what we mean by this is that there has been, in some instances, a desire to perhaps develop at a faster rate than actual protection of environments. with the long-term effect being that certain areas are unable to support the tourism numbers, which leads to a sort of net decline. And it's very difficult for those locations to recover once they've gained a reputation for being insensitive to the landscape. So this question of moderation, development, and protection as a sort of continuum is a major point. And last but not least, tourism revenues will take time to recover, and this will impact on conservation capital. We have to think of biodiversity and ecosystem services as a critical component of a broader value set that is given to society and to the planet. And if we can begin to think carefully about how we can invest in tourism and stronger tourism value chains that can support conservation capital, ultimately it will lead to increased biodiversity, and that will make it even more attractive and increase greater demand for tourism. And with that, I thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mulkana, for that fabulous presentation. Your lighting is, I think you have a lot of sunshine on you, so
Oh, unfortunately, I apologize about that.
It's okay.
Is that better?
That's better. I think everyone was paying attention to the slides. I know I definitely was. So I think Liz is still here. She hasn't gone anywhere. So now it's time for any questions. So if you have any questions, you have two options. You can raise your hand and I can call you and then you can ask your question, or you can always drop it in the Q&A. But Liz, do you have any questions you want to start off with, or?
Sure. And first of all, thank you so much to both of you for such informative presentations. Maybe I'll start with a question for Jue. I'm curious, now that the Asia, ASEAN in particular, and parts of Asia have started to open up, I'm curious what triggers, if you can share, were identified by STB or the Singapore government more broadly in order to make certain requirements fall away? And do you have those triggers in mind also to reinstate? Because the pandemic situation is certainly in flux. We're watching monkeypox. There are unknown variables like that on the landscape.
Yeah, certainly. So I think from Singapore point of view, right, that, it's important to really watch what the situation, plan out. Certainly that, we kind of, went through the wave of the COVID. However, there are other things, right, we're looking at, and the COVID is not really over yet, right? I mean, through the news, right? And then our health, ministers and ministries are also watching it very closely. So one thing we are, doing quite importantly, again, is to monitor the situation. And that where comes, that where the digital infrastructure, everything comes in, right? During the COVID times, we were doing quite extensively in terms of contact tracing, right? In terms of, digitalizing the health certificate, cert, right? To help, people to travel. But at the same time, we're also having the infrastructure at the back of the house, ready. So in the event, if there's new waves or things, then we can still be ready, and up certain, process, right? But I guess at the end of the day, it's really about the balance, right? Really to understand what is the actual health and risk measurement, that we should be looking at, right? I mean, I don't mind to share, like in the early days, it's really about the number of the cases, right? I mean, everybody is just like looking at the number of the cases, they're very concerned, right? And then local residents also have the fear of looking outward, right? Foreigners coming or short-term traveler coming, perceived as threat. But there's actually a lot of education need to be done as well to communicate what exactly is the situation. And especially for the travelers at that time coming to Singapore, they've gone through a lot of tests, right? They're perceived actually to be more even cleaner than the local residents. But how we're going to really, look at the cases, right? And then the risk management measures is not, fixed. It should be dynamic. Early days, we may be looking at really the numbers, but we all agreed, right, among us to looking at the capacity, health facility capacity, like how much really we can handle and what can we project, right, to be done to accommodate, right, the different waves as well as the travelers that we want to move in. At the end of the day, it is a balance that we have to put on the table. Tourism being a very economic force, right, for Singapore, and Singapore meaning being the hub, right, for the APAC. It's important for us to remain open, but we will need to be kind of cautiously. So I guess at the end of the day, it's really about monitoring and using the digital tools to monitor, and then constantly renew and refine our policies and point of view. We should not be just fixing one way, but looking at things holistically. And the whole of government will also work very closely with each other to kind of collaborate and nuances the policies.
Thank you very much. And McKenna, you mentioned the same thing, the importance of healthcare infrastructure to the tourism recovery. Those are intertwined now. And so it's not it's not separate issues. It's actually very much a dependency, right?
It will be top of mind for the next couple of years. I mean, we know that health tourism has been in place for a number of years, or whether that's regards to dental healthcare or dealing with cancer treatments. There's certain parts of the world that have been able to offer competitive price points with regards to that sort of health configuration. What is less understood is the insurance industry, access to hospitals, and so on. I've got a colleague, for example, just now, who said that he's reluctant to go to the United States simply because his insurance healthcare package doesn't give him the comfort that if he was to go to certain locations and anything was to happen to him, would he be secure? And the cost of that insurance was so high, he decided not to travel. These are decisions which people normally wouldn't factor in, maybe even 5 years ago. But I think increasingly people are going to start thinking very carefully, just as much about the destination and the experience, but to say, what's my plan B? How do I exit? If I have a challenge, what's the nearby hospital? And I think it's an important thing to figure out also as the demographic patterns of, let's say, more elderly people begin to play an even bigger role in terms of tourism numbers. So yes, this is something that we've picked up, and we would urge countries where possible and locations to think about the health infrastructure with as much excitement as they might think about the more attractive parts of the tourism infrastructure.
Great, thank you. And I know we have a number of good government colleagues here on the call that I know are not shy. So let's open up the floor to their questions.
Yes, can I ask a question for Julu?
This is Jerry?
Yeah, this is Jerry. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. I know that that Liz had raised the issue on triggers, and you spent a lot of time explaining what the parameters are, but can you be a little bit more specific in terms of like ratios? Are you looking at ratios, for example, not only infection rate, but also hospitalization rates or anything like that? We understand all the the reasons that you've laid out, but can you be more specific in terms of like ratios as triggers?
Yeah, so I'm from tourism board. All those particularly, and areas really will be for our, healthcare, Minister of the Health, right, to really kind of look at it. So what I've emphasized on is really a lot of times may not be really, again, the numbers or the, that we're looking at. It's about balancing in terms of projection of the people that we're gonna we're gonna, welcome back, right? Versus the infrastructure that we do have in place. And a lot of things is also, about the, what are the things that we put in place in Singapore. So I guess Singapore has been doing a really, really good job to have the internal, right, like the population, local residents to be ready to not put too much pressures on the healthcare systems as well, because that's why Singapore remain one of the highest countries who are like vaccinated, and Singapore also having the encourage people even people from 60 years above, right, to even encourage them to take the second booster, etc. Because that, I think, it's all the different dynamic aspects you have to look at it. One is the basic foundation about you want to make sure the locals are protected or not put too much pressure to the infrastructure, but at the same time you will also work out scientifically from the prediction point of view in terms of the number of people that you're going to be able to welcome versus what the healthcare infrastructure that you will have in place. So those are going to be the different data scientists and the prediction models that Ministry of Health are working like behind the scene heavily to put those in place. And that's why we can gradually and have the people to open up the borders, right? And if you see, Singapore has been very dynamic, right? How we're opening up our borders and different relaxation of the policies putting in place. There's actually like kind of a reason behind it in terms of how comfortable we are. Yeah, hope that kind of give you a sense of what exactly different aspects we're looking at.
Yeah, that's very similar to what we have here in Guam, because our infection rates go up, right? But the real key here is hospitalization, because that's really more an indication on where we are, because the community is well vaccinated here in Guam, and our key customers from Korea are highly vaccinated already. And Japan as well have risen to that. So we've made the calculated risk that they can come and we can tolerate a certain amount of positive cases, but those tend to be confusing, because if they get a PCR test, right, they could have had the disease before and they still have residuals that are showing up as positive, even though they're no longer really a health threat. So that's why we've decided to rely more on hospitalization cases as opposed to the positive cases that are detected. And so we have quite a high number of positive cases, particularly with visitors, right? When I say high, I'm not talking about an enormous amount. I'm talking maybe 2 or 3 every 100 or something like that, right? But we monitor our local health facilities, and the hospitalizations are still way down. So that's kind of gives you, to your point about balancing some of these issues.
Exactly. Just add on to that, right? I think every country in terms of their healthcare facilities is slightly different, right? Looking at Singapore, we don't not only just having hospital, right? We also have general clinics, which is also a very important force within the whole society that we rely on a lot for those facilities to provide the treatment for like mild cases, etc. So in the event if somebody, you don't just over, crowded and everybody go to the hospital, right? That you kind of, that will just gonna overwhelm the health facility very, very easily. So in terms of communication, to make it very clearly in terms of different protocols we have in place for the people to go visit different type of the clinics, hospitals, and health facilities and providers for different types of the symptoms. And I think that, yeah, that's quite important. And every country is doing slightly differently, right? Okay, so originally I'm from China. So looking at China is a very different, case that, I grow up China, there's no clinics per se, right? Everything happens, you just go to the hospital. And I guess there's also certain things that they put in place or some consideration they have in terms of they still maintain the zero COVID policy, potentially looking at the healthcare, a health facility angle. But for Singapore, I think it's important to balance the different, looking at different types of facilities that we have and how to, balance it out. And most important, the communication to the different type of people, right? Not only the foreigners, but also the locals are very, very important. So then they will have a peace of mind knowing what exactly is happening, right? And have a lot more trust in the government, in what we're doing.
Any more questions from our participants? I see Minister Masood. Do you have anything you want to add? You were one of the first destinations that were actually open. I mean, you probably have some thoughts on there's current what they were just discussing regarding hospitalizations. Said you were one of the first in the region that was open. Anything you want to add there, Minister?
Yeah, thank you very much. You're absolutely right. We were very fast, and I think we were able to do most what just now has been discussed about, especially with regard to health facilities. If we are to reflect back on first days, nobody was ready for all the beds that is required. So what we did was first we just converted some resorts, many resorts, as a quarantine isolation facilities, necessarily quarantine facilities. So early days we tried to not to take COVID to the capital city, which is really, really congested. You remember that time, but that time that was just the early days. I just returned from Singapore after being based there. In Singapore, there was this break at the labor quarters. So similar thing could happen to the capital city. So we isolate everybody on different resort beds. That was a very huge cost, but that was worth it. So we used about 3 months to establish COVID facilities across the Maldives. And by nature, each island has a clinic, and we have regional hospitals. So geographically, it was easy to manage, and we had specialty centers for people to be admitted. And I think the very important question, the tourists' concern about what is going to happen on two things. Is it going to be expensive? We introduced a domestic insurance, inbound insurance policy. So we encouraged people to take it. If anybody has a worry about it, they could take that and come back. But that one also had a small issue. We reflecting back. The insurance only covered the people who were getting positive. But the rules applies for direct contacts. And for that could be the whole family. But direct contacts are not covered. So in that insurance policy. But insurance policy really helped. And I think in Maldives' case, we had a very strong relationship between the industry and the health sector. We were able to sing the same song because President was leading the dual discussions, and he was chairing the Special Health Emergency Commission. So we were able to eventually get the same song sung. And when it is too complicated, we had, of course, WHO to refer to. When it is a WHO standard, then there isn't much debate. We tell the industry, look here, it's not us, it's World Health Organization standard. We have to adhere to that. But all in all, I think geography, working together, we have managed some, because travelers normally come on a time-bound limit. And when, unlikely when they become positive or when they become a direct contact, some were missing exams, some were missing job appointments, some had very important business meetings. Some very rich people were able to hire a private jet and travel, but many really suffered, traumatic days.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your contributions on that. Do you have any other questions from our any participants, or even our presenters can ask each other questions if you have any? I think we are at the just a little bit past the hour mark. Liz? Oh yes, Mokina. Sure.
I just wanted to commend Minister Masood for the example that he gave. It's very heartening to hear about the domestic insurance and also the recognition that direct contact was a bit of a challenge. My question is there an idea to continue with these sorts of solutions, or because you could imagine the the insurance industry might say, well, COVID is gone now, so do we still require those instruments? So have the interventions you put in place, are they permanent, or do you see them as subject to negotiation, so with relevant parties? Yeah.
Thank you. The insurance providers wanted us to make it compulsory. That would make insurance very viable, but it would be a big inconvenience for travelers, because so we eventually said if they have any insurance, that would be okay. But normally when when a source market puts an embargo on travel, like travel restrictions, travel ban, the insurance of that particular source market cease to function. There is exempt clause. This does not cover anything. If you really need money, the insurance doesn't cover it. So we had now we are in communication to enhance the package. So there will be different premiums, and it is good for everybody. And but our coverage is normally reasonably okay, and the best thing is it is cashless. So I think that gives a very good convenience for the tourists. And some hotels are partnering with the insurance company and getting it. And we also have a third-party insurance now that each island council has to take for some issues. So we shall continue. I think another important thing I think related to this is the role of travel agents that came very important during the pandemic. Earlier days, they were not there, but now from outbound travel agency at home country and inbound travel agency at the receiving destination, that was very comforting for the traveler. So they came into force and they are very active in the Maldives. We have seen a increased engagement of travel agents after the pandemic. Thank you.
Hey, Abdullah, if I could ask real quick, this is Jerry. What is the nationality profile pre-COVID and during COVID? Did you see any major shifts?
Yeah, for Maldives, of course, our biggest market before COVID was China, contributing about 30%. But one big chunk was cut off, and many expats were in Singapore and Eastern Asia, so that market was cut off. So we had a total market kind of switch over. So China was not in even it wasn't seen. So we got Russia as number one. Then after a while, before the end, because we established a special air bubble with India, India became number one. So, and this year, surprisingly, UK has held number one position for 2 months. But now, as it is, India 1, UK 2, and Russia 3, and huge increase from American market. I think during the COVID, perhaps what happened was Maldives got a lot of media coverage because we were there. Whenever there is a mic, whenever there was a camera, we want to be there. So I think that exposure, and also a lot of international chains are in Maldives now. That is helping, giving confidence to Americans. So Americans are coming. Then another thing we found it is like steady markets like Germany, who are always 4, 5, 6. 2019, Germany was 4. Even today, Germany is 4. So they are steady, stable markets. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Sorry, yeah, just if I may add on, one big change was the duration of stay has become significantly longer. That's very positive.
Well, thank you very much for those insights. I'm sure a lot of people would love to hear more about those insights about the Maldives. You probably have a lot to share, said since one of the first destinations were open, but maybe we can set up for another session and have you back with us, Minister, to pick your brain about that. But we are a bit over the hour, so I know many of you probably have to go back to work or other things like Liz. But Liz, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say my big thank you, because I know this is exactly what we wanted to achieve. You know, I know that Maldives has shared before, Guam, Hawaii, and today Singapore. You know, my goal was really to bring, you know, like a warm collaborative discussion together, you know, so that markets could help each other, because, you know, no one has the perfect solution. We all have a particular market dynamic, but certainly, you know, I so appreciate this type of sharing, and we wanted to keep it, you know, comfortable and closed forum. So thank you so much to everyone for contributing.
Yes, thank you to both STB and thank you to Dahlberg, Zhu, and Mokena. I think both excellent presentations. Presentations will be available for all of our government members, as well as recordings. So if you missed any part of the session, we will be sending the recording and the presentation to all of you. But we do ask you to keep it internally and do not share it with any third party. So if you have any further questions, you can, let me just pull up my screen here a second.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jerry. Always a pleasure having you here. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Liz. There's our email right there on the screen. It's very simple, liz@potter.org or paul@potter.org. So again, thank you so much to all of our speakers today, and of course, all of our participants. Thank you to Dr. Masoom, Jerry, and Jennifer, and all of you so much for coming today. Said, feel free to reach out if there's any other questions, and hopefully we will see you at our upcoming events, or if not, at the next government session. So stay safe, stay healthy, take care, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you,
Bye.
Thank you
Paul.
very
Thank
much.
you, Liz. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Makana. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all. Take care.